talk. I'm ready to do many talks.
That's true.
Yeah, we're launching off installation.
Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for coming. This is my pleasure to introduce you our speaker today, who is Mireia Alcantara Rodriguez, who is originally from Spain, but she's still enrolled in a PhD program in ethnobotany, although she already finished her thesis and she's just about to graduate from this program in ethnobotany at Leiden University in the Netherlands. So she has many interests and passions connected with plants and people. She was part, her dissertation was part of the European Research Council funded project Brasiliae, which studied indigenous knowledge in the making of science, and which is directed by Mariana Francoso. She was supervised by her as well as by Tinda van Andel, who is also the co-supervisor of Niklas, who came a bit earlier.
Okay.
Yes, and so tonight she's going to talk about plant knowledge depicted, botanical identifications of 17th century illustrations of Dutch Brazil. And yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. So hello, good evening. I'm very happy to be part of this series of botanical encounters. With my presentations, I want to show you a glimpse into the research I've been doing for the last few years that falls into the topic of colonial botany. So I've done this research in close collaborations with my supervisors in Mariana. And let's go. Plant knowledge depicted. What do botanical illustrations reveal about colonial science in 17th century Brazil? But first of all, I would like you to tell me, if you know, what do you think is the connection between Brazil, the Netherlands? This is the Maurits House Museum in Den Haag, also known as the palace made of sugar. May seem familiar for some of you. Berlin, and this beautiful city in Krakow, in Poland. Well, maybe not. So here we go, is this book. So it doesn't say much at first sight, it's rather an old book, but let's open it. And we see a first folio showing this beautiful crown with flowers, with fruits. It's called Historia Naturalis. But what is this about? What's the journey of this book? Well, in the 17th century, the Dutch West India Company colonized the northeastern territories of Brazil. In 1636, they appointed as Governor General of the colony, Count Johann Maurits of Nassau. So he arrived there, and besides his military and administrative duties that were related to the sugarcane plantations, to the slave trade, etc., he was also keen of the natural environment, let's say. So he commissioned a team of naturalists and artists to depict, to portray, to document the flora, the fauna, the minerals, everything they encounter in the colony. So among them, we have physician Willem Piso, we have naturalist George Marcgrave, we have Dutch painters Albert Hout and Frans Post, and other people, and some of them not really acknowledged or we don't know yet, must dig a bit farther in the archives. So they arrived to the colony and they were documenting and collecting, gathering plants, etc. And Johann Maurits took all this material and he returned to the Dutch Republic in 1644. So he kind of pieced a bit the Dutch West India Company, but he has some loose pockets. So they made him return, but he didn't come back empty-handed. He brought all these notes, all these drawings, and I'm going to show you now some of the outcomes from this colonial enterprise. So first, we have the book, Historia Naturalis Brasiliae. This is a book that includes two main sections. The first section is authored by the physician Piso, and it's mostly about medicinal plants and tropical diseases. No? So the plants that were used to heal from these ailments. And the second section is authored by the naturalist, George Marcgrave, and there is chapters about plants, about animals. There is a little chapter at the end that says a bit about the inhabitants of the colony as perceived by the naturalist. He named a few groups. There is a brief chapter at the end. And then 10 years later, Piso was not happy with this book, was not happy how this book was arranged. So he took most of the material from the book. Then he had also some additions, and he published the book India Historia Naturalis Brasiliae. So he could do this because the editor of the Historia, who was Johannes de Laet, one of the directors of the West India Company, also a cartographer, he passed away. George Marcgrave never made it to the Netherlands. And apparently Marcgrave and Piso had some beef between them, and he just took all information and signed it in his own and did this book. So then we also have a set of dry specimens. These were plants that were collected in the field, apparently by George Marcgrave, and then they were pressed, they were dried, and they were preserved over the centuries. This is around 400 years, and look how well preserved they look. This is a younger version of myself. And so I put it there to see in perspective how big is this herbarium book. And this, you can find it in Copenhagen, in the herbarium of the Botanical Garden. It's kept there today. About the books, I have to say they were quite influential. They were a hit at the time, and also some centuries later, they were used by scholars, by naturalists, physicians, and not only in Europe, but in the northeast of Brazil, where this book was based on, but also in other regions of Brazil, or even in other regions of the tropics. For example, Maria Sibila, she named Marcgrave and Piso in her work in the 19th century. Hans Sloane, collector of Naturalia, slaveholder, physician, when he worked in Jamaica to create his natural history of Jamaica, he also mentioned Marcgrave and Piso. So they kind of use it as a field guide, although it's not precisely like a pocket size, but it was really influential. Then we have all these images. There are watercolors, all paintings, sketches, and so on. What Johann Maurits did with this is he gave them to the Elector of Brandenburg, Frederick William, in 1652 as a diplomatic gift. And then the Elector gave them to his physician in court, Christian Menzel, and he had to organize all the material. And the purpose of this was to have it in the library of the Elector, so intellectuals, scholars could have a look at this, and all the people that were interested with these exotic faraway lands, as they perceive them. In the library of the Elector, by time became the Royal Library, and then the State Library of Berlin. So scholars kept looking into these collections of paintings, but then war happened, and to prevent it from the bombing, this material was evacuated. So in some point, it was in the Silesia, today's Poland, but then it was lost. It was lost for decades. Until in the late 70s, zoologist Peter Whitehead located in the Jagiellonian Library in Poland, in Krakow. So that's the journey, quite a journey of this book. So what have we done with all this? Well, these collections of images, they are separated in 3 separate collections. We have the Theatrum Rerum Naturalium. There are like 173 oil paintings. Then we have the Miscellanea Clayery. It's more like sketches, drawings, like made by pencil and crayons, other techniques. And then we have the watercolors of the Libri Principis, that is also known as handbooks or manuais in Portuguese. So all these were included in a larger collection in the 19th century that is called Libri Picturati. You maybe know it because it also includes the 16th century watercolors that were attributed to Carolus Clusius and Saint-Omer. this collection was also identified by botanists and so on. But well, motivated by Valentina Pugliani, the one say that we are told that the nature of the foreign was understood through its natural objects. What this nature was, we are often left to wonder. We didn't want to wonder no more, so we apply botanical image analysis to these historical collections, which is just a fancy way to say that I probably made up, that we identify the plants, okay? So the material was studied highly by art historians that look at it as objects of art, because they are objects of art. However, they represent also beings in nature, so we treat them as subjects. That's why we identify them, and once we know which species we are talking about, we can place them in a specific socio-environmental context. So, for example, let me show you. We have here the passiflora. You maybe recognize this plant, no? The passion fruit that is quite delicious. Then we have here Gustavia augusta. This is a tree. This is a plant from the cotton family. And then this one here is a beautiful liana, Centrosema brasilianum. So how we identify them? What we did is to look into, well, a lot of taxonomical literature, botanical keys, databases, but also it happened that this material is highly related to books. Actually, Menzel, the physician of the lector, was checking at the books in order to organize the material, because there are many illustrations in common with the bootcuts there are bootcuts in the book inside. And here there are references, can't see there, but these are references to pages in the Historia and in the other book. So previously, we actually identified the species in the books based in the identifications of Brazilian botanist José Bento Pickel, and also identifications of also Brazilian botanist André de Lima and his team who look at the herbarium in Copenhagen in the 70s. So we check at their identifications and we update them. What does it mean? It means that names change all the time because of molecular genetic advances. No matter what, taxonomy is like to drive us crazy, and the name you are seeing here maybe in 2 years is different. So we have to check one by one, also validate the identifications, looking at herbariums and so on. For example, this plant, Centrosema, before it used to call Clitoria brasiliana because of the morphology of the flower, I would say, which I think is a beautiful name, but apparently it's not part of the Clitoria genus, so now it's Centrosema. So, a ver. So what else? So with all this, what we can also do is look at the book, at the Historia, and infer a lot of botanical knowledge. For example, we can see if the plants are native from Brazil or they come from other places. We can see the plant habit. What is that? Are they trees? Are they herbs? What are they? For example, you could see that this is a liana, you see the tendrils, no, to entangle over trees or fences or whatever. But this, you see just flowers. This is a tree. This is a big tree. Then we check the domestication status. So were they cultivated, were domesticated by humans, or they grew just wild. And we check the plant parts that are represented, because with this we can infer knowledge about the methods of collection. And we also check the conservation status to see if some of these plants are now in danger or vulnerable or facing extinction. So I'm going to show you some examples now and a lot of illustrations. So this is an example of cross-reference. So this is the book. This is a bootcut. And this is the description. This is the vernacular name of this plant in Brazil. It says tapia. Tapia is an indigenous name. Then you have description of the morphology, or if it has some taste, some scent, etc. And in some part, they also talk about the use. In this case, Marcgrave states that the leaves of tapia are used against a worm that the Spanish call bicho do culo. It's like a round worm. And they are also used to alleviate the fevers. Actually, if I check at this plant today, it's still used to mitigate fevers. So you can see some parallels in these retentions. But what interests me in this comparison is that, see this illustration. This is a fruiting branch with a fruit open showing the seeds. This is a flowering branch. These are the flowers, inflorescence, and these are mini fruits. It's like the immature fruit. They look like capers, isn't it? This is a Caperaceae family. And check also how actually the scientific Western nomenclature took the indigenous name and create the name, Crateva. But the thing is, these two illustrations make this one. See, it's a combination of both. So in this way, they save money, they save time, they don't need to carve another woodblock, they don't need to pay more money to the artist or whatever. And very important, they convey as much botanical knowledge possible in one image. Here you can see the fruiting branch in nature and the flowering branch, and this belongs to trees in 2 different areas in the Northeast. Sometimes it can happen in the same plant, so I don't know if they collected from the same plant at different times in different areas, but this is interesting to look at related to phenology. This is just an example of the work of Martius, Flora Brasiliensis in the 19th century, how they depict the same plant. Still, here we have the flowering branch, a fruiting branch, but then we have cuts, like a longitudinal cut of the flower, more details of the anatomy, and so on. Well, you hear me saying, oh, this is an indigenous name. This is a super oversimplification. So in Brazil in the 16th century, there is an estimation of the indigenous population of 2 to 4 million, belonging to more than 1,000 different peoples. Today, there is circa 900,000 individuals who speak more than 160 languages. So what happened is Tupinamba was the most widely spoken language along the coast, and then colonies, missionaries, like the Portuguese, like the Jesuits, because before the Dutch, think that the Portuguese were there since the 1500s. They adopt this language, to communicate with the indigenous population for different purposes. So what they did in textual accounts is they separate and they simplify the indigenous groups mostly in 2 groups. Tupi, who were those that live in the coast and were more like integrated, I hate the word, into the colonial Dutch, say, lifestyle. And then Tapuya, whoever was not Tupi, and they feared them, and they were savages and cannibalists and so on. So they were having alliances with peoples from these groups. Sometimes they were at war, depending if they were if they subjugate or not to the hegemonic power. And these are portraits that are in Copenhagen. It's all the material everywhere in Brazil, actually. So this is a portrait by Albert Eckhout. And this, when I say Tupi, or this is a Tupi-based name, actually I'm referring to this huge family. It's a macro-linguistic family, Tupi, that includes different languages and spoke by many different people. So it's not 2 kind of people. I'm simplifying. This is another close reference. This is the passiflora you saw, and here is in the book. And then you see other species that are very related, but are different species. You see here the flower in nature. I think the artist who did the watercolors or was not in Brazil or didn't read Latin, because in the description it's clear that the flower has this reddish purplish color, but then they didn't paint it like that. There is 2 watercolor copies scattered in the world. No, not many, mostly are black and white. And this was called in Tupi-based language Murucuya Wasu. You know the name Maracuya today? So this is also a retention. And Wasu means bigger, perhaps because of the big size of the fruit in comparison to the others. The fruit is edible, and the painters use the green from the leaves, which I wonder if they actually use it in some of this material, but that's another project. So, in the Libri Picturati, in total, there are 234 illustrations that belong to 198 taxa. What is taxa? What's this funky word? Well, this is one illustration. This is another one. This is another one. If we put them together, we make a puzzle and we get this plant. This is a taxon, Furcrea fetida. Taxon is the singular of taxa. So this just means that sometimes some illustrations represent the same plant. In this case, this is quite cool. This is like a puzzle, but sometimes it's just the same plant represented in different ways. Maybe because it was painted by a different artist, or because it was collected at a different time, different place, it just looks different, etc. This plant actually is introduced, doesn't come from Brazil. It was introduced, we know, with this iconography that was there in the 1640s. And today actually is quite invasive, grows a lot along the coast, and is altering the ecosystems. And in general, the plants come from Brazil, okay, are native. If you see this, don't worry about the graphics, just the boring numbers. So, but most plants are from Brazil, but I pay a lot of attention to the ones that are introduced because there are evidence of movement by humans, of trade, the movement of plants and humans. So, well, these plants, you're probably very familiar with them. We have the lemon, the pomegranate, and the grapevine. And these plants were actually already there when the Portuguese seized the land. So they were, for example, using lemons for the cold and also for the fevers, also eating it, maybe just drinking also a glass of wine. The thing is, when the Dutch arrived, these plants were already growing there, and then they also cultivate them. So to have an idea, Johann Maurits arrived in Recife, and then he built his own palace. Actually, he made his own city, which he called Mauritsstad, which means Maurits city. And then he also ordered to make botanical gardens compared to the style of the botanical gardens in Europe, no? This fashion about organizing, not dominating the landscape. And he ordered the local population to bring, and enslaved people, enslaved Africans, to bring plants, also animals for his menagerie. So he had a whole experiment, a whole experimental station very close to his palace for painters, for naturalists, no? To document. This has been very discussed, no? That perhaps they just didn't have to go very far away. They were just painting there in the comfort of the palace vicinities. And these plants were growing there according to historical accounts. But this plant struck my attention. So this is a story of Inimboy. Guilandina Bonduc is a plant from the bean family. Okay, and here you have the woodcut. Here you have the oil painting in the theatrum. See, that is a very similar image in reverse. It says in the Historia that a handful of the roots is vomitive and is used against poison. Doesn't say much more about the use, but this plant comes from Africa, from West Africa territories. So how did it end up in Brazil? If I check a literature, I'm going to read that most likely the oceanic currents brought the seeds, and that's why it's growing along the coast of Brazil. That's why also it's called in Portuguese Silva da Praia. Praia means beach, because of the round shape of the seeds. However, when I went to Jamaica, where I actually met Cristina, I was so curious about this plant. I was showing this image to everyone. I was so annoying until Benji. Benji is a person, is a guy that is now in Jamaica, but he's originally from Ghana. He didn't recognize, I think, the plant at first sight, but I showed him this, and he said, "Okay, this comes from Ghana. This comes from Africa. What oceanic currents and what not? My ancestors brought it here." And then I check information in Barbados, oral stories of Afro-descendant people, Afro-Caribbean people, that for them this plant is very important. They use the seeds in this game. This is a game from the Mancala family. You know it? Amazing. I actually brought the seed. If you want to pass them along and you want to touch them, they're like quite interesting. Yeah, in Ghana it's called Oware. In other regions in Africa it's called Wari. In the Caribbean it's called Wari. Has different names. And the oral accounts tell us that actually the enslaved population, they were gathering together and playing this game, and the master wouldn't allow that because, yeah, they were meeting, they didn't like them to meet up and so on. But of course, this game persists until today. So I think it's a very important sign of persistence and resilience of the Afro-descendant population. This is just an example of other contemporary sources, other ways of illustrating or portraying plants. This is the same plant in Imboy. This is in the Miscellanea Clayeri, but here you see, we see the fruits, we see the flower, we see the seeds. Here we just see the flowers. So I think the Menser, when he was organizing this material, he just took it out because this portrays more botanical information. Here is an example of a specimen in the herbarium of Marcgrave, presumably collected by him. And see the difference here, you can see some volume, isn't it? And here is more flat, because you really need to flatten the species and they take all the water out. And this is a flowering one. And here, a century later, the son of Jacob Breine, who was a merchant, collector, he actually made an engraving. And he said that his dad had specimens of Marcgrave. His dad was not in Copenhagen, his dad was in Leiden. So there is more specimens in other collections, because I think it looks pretty much the same, and it may come from the specimens that were collected in Dutch Brazil at that time. And this is a copper engraving, so that's why also it's a bit different than the woodcut. And now we have the sunflower, so popular. The story of the sunflower goes back to Mexico, or the southern part of North America, where it originates. The Spanish colonizers learned the uses from the native population about the sunflower that was used medicinally for food, fibers, etc. Merchants brought the seeds to Spain. It was thriving. Then the botanical, for example, in the Royal Botanical Garden of Madrid was thriving. But they use it more as ornamental because it's a very beautiful plant. Then arrived to the Netherlands at some point, then to Russia, and they improved it genetically because for them was interesting as a crop to produce oil, sunflower oil, and then back to the Americas. It's dated to appear in Brazil in the 20th century. However, here we have it in the 1640s. So this iconography is evidence of early introduction of specific plants, like in this case, the sunflower. We have also others. And what interests me, because then you think, how we get there? How did they get there? So you can think, well, maybe the Portuguese who were there before brought it, but they were more interested in medicinal plants they could use in their boticas, in local pharmacopeias, no? Maybe the Dutch, because Dutch were very acquainted with this plant. In 1568, Bert Dodoens depict the first portrait, the first iconography of the sunflower in his herbal. So it was very fashionable for Dutch since the 16th century, and it was growing also in botanical gardens, so maybe they brought it there. But lately I'm thinking a bit differently. Look at the name, Camaraguasu. So again, a Tupi-based name. Guasu, remember from the Passiflora, Guasu means bigger in Tupi-based languages. In contrast to miri, which means small, there is a plant in Historia that is called Camara miri. Has nothing to do taxonomically to the sunflower, to Elianthus. It's different family, different species, doesn't matter. It's a plant that is smaller, it has yellow flowers. So perhaps that's why the name. Actually, this plant, it says in the Historia that the enslaved people, enslaved Africans, use it to broom the house of their masters. So it's evidence that they were also forcibly being used as domestics, not only in the sugarcane plantation, but they were in many dimensions of life. And lately I'm thinking maybe indigenous peoples traded, like more recently, there is more archaeological, linguistic, and botanical, ethnographic research that is proven that actually these trades between different populations of indigenous peoples were much more extensive, much more complex than what it has been said or proved before in literature. So they did manage their environment. They knew better than the Europeans when they arrived. So maybe they actually traded in these extensive trade routes. One way or another, they were familiar with the sunflower when it was in the Dutch colony, because you name what you use. So checking at the plant habit and domestication status, well, just to put it brief, there is differences between the collections. In the Teatrum, we see a lot of trees that grow in the wild. They don't paint the tree itself because it will fade in the background. You will just see a trunk with some leaves. So what they do is to get a branch, preferably a fruiting branch or a flowering branch. This is the cassava you may be familiar with. This is the miscellanea theory, the cassava rhizome. And this is in the Libri Principis. In the Libri Principis, there are many domesticated plants. The cassava is also domesticated. And there are also many herbs. Domesticated, these domesticates are pre-Columbian domesticates. So they were long time domesticated by indigenous peoples. The carique papaya as well, but this was introduced to Brazil, also by indigenous trade. And then we have these herbs, these lianas, this is from the bean family, that this can grow just, I don't know, in the vicinities of Maurits Palace. So I think scholars were right that many plants they portray, they were doing it in the comfort, let's say, of their home, from the comfort of their home. However, in this case, they may have ventured more into the interior, or they also got it from someone else. In the book, there is testimony that they were getting a lot of plant material from indigenous peoples. They were bringing it to them. It's also known that they were doing expeditions. These were not per se botanical expeditions, they were military expeditions. So they would be the Dutch with alliances with some indigenous groups. They would be looking, for example, to have a conflict or to have fight with another group. And in this expedition, the naturalists came along and they were botanizing, they were gathering specimens. And the plant parts of the plants, of the illustration, sorry, this is very interesting because, as Nicholson said, botanical illustrations can serve as historical sources into the working practices of botanists. So most of the illustrations are like the one here, are branches with fruits and flowers. But I also found interesting when they are like just loose parts of the plants. For example, this one that looks like a shoe or something. I don't even know how to identify this one because it's this plant. It's a liana that can grow very high in the tropical trees. And it has these beautiful white symmetrical flowers. Then it has this fruit that falls on the ground. It opens and it has these seeds, very light seeds that disperse by the wind. And they paint this, the shoe. So I think they didn't see the flower, they didn't see the whole plant. This could be a plant, that was brought to the painter by an indigenous person, for example. Also, Marcgrave in the book said he wouldn't paint, he wouldn't document anything he wouldn't see with his own eyes. So in this case, maybe they were not that connected, the painters and the naturalists. It also has an indigenous name, Yarupari Curaba. And they also know as Pene do Macaco, monkey's comb, because of the shape. So to check into the conservation status is important because we can see if there are endangered species. These are just examples of two of them. So we have Dagmea muricata. It's this plant with this fruit. They also show a transversal cut. It looks like a pineapple. It's actually from the pineapple family. That's why. And then we have this cactus. We have it in the Libri Principis, and this is a portrait by Eckhout, a still life painting. You see it here. Then see you have the passiflora with the fruits, the lemons again, some watermelon. So all this material is highly connected. And what this happened, these species are endangered, mostly because of habitat loss, due to deforestation and land degradation, by intensive agribusiness, by monoculture, urbanization, speculation, pollution, climate change, etc. And this is the story of Umbu. This is Spondias tuberosa. And here you can also see in the Teatrum, in the woodcut, in both, they make quite prominent this tuber. They put it in the foreground in the Teatrum, they put it in the back in the woodcut. Here it has like more artistic detail, let's say. Here looks more like a mouse or something, but still is showing the flowers, the fruits. It's quite similar one to another. And in the book, it says that it's called umbu or umbi, and the fruit is edible. And its roots, they refer to this, deserve special attention because of how they develop underground and their use as a refreshment for feverish patients and exhausted travelers, as I experimented myself. This is the physician kind of bragging about this first-hand observation or experimentation. Obviously, he saw someone else trying it before, probably an indigenous person, a local person. Today, it's called umbuceiro. The fruit is what is called umbu. And in Brazil, they make a refreshment, maybe you know, called umbuzada. They also use the wood as medicinal. And then look, this amazing system of tubers that is called Chilopodia. This is very important for the tree because it's how the tree survives in this semi-arid environment that is called sertão or hinterland. That is found in the Caatinga biome in Brazil, which is a unique ecosystem in Brazil, in the world. It's just, we can only find it in Brazil. So it's a strategy for the tree to survive because it's full of water and nutrients, but also for the people, because they did use it when it was needed, and they still use it today. Actually, umbu means árvore que dá de beber. In Portuguese, like the tree that gives something to drink. And it's like the sacred tree of the Sertão, of this hinterland. There is a lot of history, not only in the 17th century, but in the 20th century, there's a lot of history very important for Brazil with the wars de Canudos and so on and so forth. So it's very interesting if you want to check out this plant and all the history behind. And to finish, we have here another example of this plant, urucú or Vixia orellana. This doesn't grow only in Brazil. You find it, for example, in Colombia, where it's called achiote. And it has this fruit that you open and you see these red vivid seeds, as they also show in the old painting in the teatrum. But then you have the woodcut, where they show rather an old, kind of old branch with some details of the flower. Here, actually, that the fruits are closed or semi-open, but I think the painter that did the watercolor probably confused it with the leaves. And here is an example of a woodcut in the work that Piso published by himself. So he took the woodcut from the Historia, I think this was collected by Marcgrave, actually, in Brazil. And then he had this branch. He borrowed it from the work of Clusius, which he published in the Exoticorum Libri Decem in 1605. And Clusius, he never traveled overseas, he never crossed the Atlantic. He got it from his colleague Peter Garrett, collector of Naturalia, an aristocrat, who said that the indigenous peoples were using the seeds to paint their faces, their bodies. And actually, they still do it today. Also in the Historia, they say that the indigenous people sell it to the Portuguese. It was traded in Europe, it was used in cosmetics, medicine, food colorant, and dye is still, the uses are persisting quite a lot today. So, in this research that falls in the intersection of botany, history, and art, what do these botanical illustrations tell us? So, combined with the textual sources, they can tell us many stories. We can check plant use retentions over time. We can check about how these plants were gathered or collected. And I think all this could be enriched with more linguistics research, so we can check further into these Tupi-based names and really look at the root of them. Also, there are some African names. So in this way, we can actually trace where they really come. And in general, plants came from very diverse environments in Brazil or from outside of Brazil. And one way or another, they embody the biocultural heritage of humans from different backgrounds. think that this is a book that aimed to portray the natural history of Brazil by the Western gaze. But a lot of indigenous epistemologies are also embedded in these sources. It's just that they were not acknowledged as the contributors of this knowledge, but the knowledge was gathered from them. The plants, everything was from their environment, and it was a highly complex society. There was enslaved Africans from different regions, indigenous people from different regions, many indigenous people misplaced and runaway slaves, Portuguese, Jews that were running away from the Inquisition, Spanish people, very complex sociopolitical context. So also this is a repository of historical distributional data. With that, we can check at the traits, no, the dispersion routes, people move and plants move along, as well as the knowledge associated to these plants. We can check the origin of ecological disturbance. Remember the puzzle plant, this big plant that occupy like 4 folios. So yeah, this is an example we can do with it. And of course, this natural history collection must be preserved and they should be made accessible. So especially in the last years, there is a lot of projects of digitizing historical collections, sorry. Of course, that's very important. Actually, most of my research I did based on digital images because it was a pandemic in between and I couldn't move much. However, is this the only way, or is this the way to make it accessible, and to whom are we really making this material accessible? So I think that this is quite a journey, no, from Brazil to Poland, but what about bringing it back? So after all, we are talking about colonial sources. As Wendy Genius put it, this is colonized knowledge. So it's knowledge highly biased. It has a high Eurocentric bias, but also it includes a lot of indigenous epistemologies. So we need to look at it critically and carefully. And after all, these other people plant the story. These are not my own. I just want to tell you some examples. I tell you this because I have it in my hands. I had the privilege to work with these sources. But I think it's about time that the people who are really connected to these plants, to these stories, they tell their own if they want to. Muito obrigada. Many thanks. Thank you so much for your attention. And yeah, if you want to check more about this project, actually, you can check my ResearchGate profile, and there is all the publications that are related to this project with the Libri Picturati, but also with the books. And I also check out all these medicinal plants and other uses, and drew parallels with modern Brazil. So yeah, it's a lot of information that I tried to sum up, but it's impossible. So if you want to check more, please. And yeah, looking forward to your feedback and questions and whatever you feel like sharing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. That was really fascinating. And I will ask you if you have questions, but I will ask a first one because I can't resist. So I found that very interesting. I heard this story of the current that takes things from Africa to the Caribbean as well. And when I went to Barbados in January, I found in Bridgetown there's a tree, which is a baobab tree, which is estimated to be 800 years old or 1,000, so about like 8,000 years old. So it's a very established tree, and they believe that tree arrived like this, like by just chance the seed came over, and all together apparently there are 5 baobab trees in Barbados. And so I kind of calculated what time that was then, and it's not too far away from the time when Mansa Musa, who was the richest person who ever lived on Earth, and he apparently had, or he or his son had an expedition from Africa to discover, to sail around the world with something like 300 or more ships. And I could totally imagine that actually Africans travel to, the Americas potentially, and maybe like in the baobab tree, you know the age of the tree, like the little seed that is the game. Maybe it's a smaller plant and you don't know the age, or there is no proof, but maybe there are trees that could be proofs of that. It would be really fantastic.
It would be. What the people told you about it?
I didn't talk to people, but there was a sign around the tree which said the story that, oh, this is a seed that must have traveled through the current. And I thought, like, yes, who knows?
Yeah, the thing is, seeds can indeed travel by the current, but they can also be brought on purpose or not by people. And the thing is, we really need to be careful with that, because if we only attend to these scientific theories that the currents and so on, we erase the agency of people that were bringing their plants.
I thought that was erased on purpose, because it was not presented as a hypothesis, but it was like that was the only possible way. That was it.
Yeah. Very interesting. I bet there's many similar stories. And
some of these plants are, renamed, aren't they?
Yes, so I pass it on.
Kind of renamed and, given really derogatory names. I know there's one that my dad was showing me in the Cabera McHugh called Stench of Malata, and it's just a horrid.
How was the name, sorry?
Stench of Malata, because it was brought from Africa and it would have had an African name, but then a European would have given it this name, and it's just a horrid thing. Really racist, but it's so kind of interwoven in quite a lot of the botanical names that I've noted certain things, where there's some of them are less obvious than that one, but there are quite a lot of sort of horrible names that are just
Yeah, you just remember me some plants I saw in Curacao. Actually, they had horrible sexist names also.
Yeah.
There's
a lot.
I'm not even gonna say them here, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I had to say that one because
After some beers.
so obviously.
No, it's really bad. Yeah.
But yeah, that's just I just noted that these plants did come in. They were brought especially because I think the women were using it to cook with. They brought it from Africa with them, and yeah.
Which plant was this?
Well, this is something I have written down somewhere, but I don't have in my brain today.
That's right.
So, but I could find it out for you. Yeah.
I can pass it on.
The names can tell us so many stories.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah, I just would like to ask it. Obviously, you referred to the indigenous people or the Black residents in Brazil being forgotten, but do they make any mention at all of the interactions that they had? Whether they were using the knowledge obtained from enslaved people, or whether they were taking indigenous guides on expeditions, or do they give any recognition at all of the way that they have acquired the knowledge?
It's pretty much concealed. They do have a few sentences saying that they got material from indigenous people, indigenous Brazilian, they say Brasilianos. It's just no names. So I can tell you Piso, Marcgrave, I can tell you even more names are connected, all white, all dudes, all the time, but there is no names, there is no name specifics of the population. So we see it, for example, with the use, and with the origin of the plants. There is a plant that it looks a bit like a tomato. This is an African plant. It's a Solanum from the tomato family, actually. And this plant was cultivated there. They cultivated for their food, enslaved Africans. But it's not really say, oh, I don't know. It doesn't really describe an interaction per se. So it's more concealed behind names. So the roots, the etymological roots of the names and the origin of the plants and so on. My colleague Carolina Monteiro, if you're interested in slavery in Dutch Brazil and agency, please check her out because she's amazing. She's digging in the archives like crazy. And she's getting so much valuable information. She's getting names, she's getting data. And sorry, what I was gonna say. Sorry, wait me a second. Yeah, she told me that actually in the archives it said that okay, it was this Johann Maurits and the people, this team, no, of naturalist artists, they were sitting on the table with him in Palace, and there is data about that in the archives. And they say that every person, like Piso, Marcgrave, they had an assistant for themselves, sitting with them at the table. So she thinks this assistant, called assistant in the archive, is probably an enslaved person. Also think about this process of knowledge making or visual making. Who do you think that I was, I don't know, like smashing the pigments for the paintings, or collecting these plants, or the process of drying plants is not one day to another. So of course they had assistants. Of course there was an unequal power structure, hierarchies and so on, but this is more concealed, and maybe we dig a bit farther in the archives. But related to the African agency, her work is amazing, and she's going to reveal a lot of things that should have been revealed a long time ago, and she's bringing it to the table. Oh, yeah.
Anyone else?
I mean, it's fascinating, the information that obviously because you're used to scientific information about plants and whatever, but I think it's fascinating to see the social background to the plants and the knowledge from indigenous people. And is there any way that they can be tied together? So, you know, in the future, information about plants will include the history and the sort of social background to the uses and.
In what way, sorry?
Well, I'd like to see some sort of database where when you look up a plant or you want to know about a plant, it tells you not just the scientific stuff, but the background, human side.
Of course. Yeah, well, in the database I create, this is the last project I've been working this couple of years ago. But the first database I create, I name the plants, and I say if the name is indigenous or if of African origin, Portuguese, and then I add the use. I add the use in English. So how was used by the people, and if they do name who use it, for example, most of the plants they say Indigenous Brazilian, they just don't specify who, which group. I add it. I add that information. Now, what I think will be really interesting is to do something with Indigenous Brazilians today.
I think
not to replicate these techniques per se. No.
I think raising the status of local knowledge.
For example, or the thing is not for me to say. It's more like in 2018, actually, we went to Brazil and we initiated a conversation with a couple of people. They live in Pará, it's a bit northern than the territories where the Dutch went. They speak Kapo language. It's a Tupi-based language. And we're having a conversation because they already initiate some projects with the Museum Gold in Belém. So we had some contacts and we were discussing if we could do some what is called like cultural revitalization projects. But this is a conversation. This is something that is not from night to day. So we were just talking with the representatives of Kapo. They were interested initially, but also they were, of course, more worried about their livelihoods because their lands are threatened by logging, by extractive activities. So where do you really place this kind of projects that, of course, in the long term, they can amazing things you can do with this material. You can do like I don't know, educative material for kids, like I don't know, like anything in the language, they can make it in the language, put the uses or whatever they want. This is something to decide together, not for me to say. But then this happened and then the pandemic happened.
Yeah, but I think that that's also maybe like a self, you know, like not an ethnography project, but like a self-ethnography, an auto-ethnography project for people there, where they can do oral history around plants, and they can make like little videos of people talking about what they do with it. And this is something that you don't even know, like maybe it's better if you don't go there and they just do it themselves.
I also think there's a lot of plant blindness. People like,
Yeah.
you know, animals, they like birds.
It's
They
just there.
actually just don't see plants. They don't.
True.
The actual status of plants themselves for the majority of people, you know, is just not as high on their kind of, and it kind of takes some sort of connective education to get people to really value them, I think.
Yeah, indeed.
So I think that's what's really needed right now with that area.
Yeah.
I think it's got something to do with local people, but it's, you know, it's obviously an international need for that as well. But
Yeah.
But I always believe in starting from the ground up, you know, start
Of
with
course.
the people who, the young, you know, and get them educated and excited. And although medicinal knowledge is, you know, very part of people's lives up in, you know, in the Northeast, it's still, even as far as, you know, the type of plants that they might want to just have that look pretty, they might completely not look at the ones that are right in front of their face, the beautiful ones that are naturally growing in the cracks and pavements or whatever, and they'll bring in some other kind of species because they just think it's got more status to it because it's something that's been cultivated in a different way. I don't know. I just think there's something there that needs to be addressed and kind of gathered together with people, you know, and communities. Just that's what I think.
That sounds like a beautiful and very meaningful project. No, to kind of put down the thing about the weeds, the so-called weeds. The weeds are really useful.
Well, that is part of my project.
That's amazing.
Do you have a question? Okay. Yeah, like I wanted to ask something more, which is about the aesthetics of these representations, that this is really just beautiful as well as knowledge represented. And I really wonder, like you also said a few things about the art element, that they extracted the green of the leaf, and that the also the usefulness determined what was drawn, because they wanted to show you the operational parts, like like the flowers and the fruit. But that would be interesting to see how that, you know, you can go to a furniture store. I can take you tomorrow, and you will see these things, and you will find, you know, there will be like a home decoration in 2023, something like this framed with a wooden frame would be like 120 pounds, something like that, and people would hang this on their wall just because it looks like it looks like something that is somehow elevated and interesting. And
and in this case in Europe, people were getting crazy because of course it was something that came from faraway lands, so it had more value, and it showed that the person that only had more status because they could they had the privilege to have that. And actually with the Maurits, they brought now that you say some artifacts. There is like a bunch, and it's carved wood, and it has some motifs that we didn't identify them yet, but are probably many of the tropical plants that I show you in Brazil. In this they are carved over there. So they still do, and the sunflower is everywhere as well. Aesthetically.
Yeah, that it becomes also a decorative motif, but also that this type of painting or this type of drawing is still somehow fashionable, and we draw these things like this, although we don't want it. We can take a picture now of the plant, which is much more exact, so we don't need to draw just so that the botanist can recognize the plant.
With the pictures, there's a big debate now with there is a lot of apps, you know, to recognize them with pictures. But of course, we always recommend to consult botanists, to consult the herbarium. The herbarium are just libraries of plants, no, to consult, to compare one with another and see details, no, that are preserved, how the leaves are disposed. And
There's so much to do with DNA now.
now,
So-
yeah,
And I think my dad is in his 80s, he's a botanist from Kew. He feels quite upset because people don't go to the field in the same way they used to. And it's all done on this DNA
yeah.
sort of structure, you know, lots more now. And he feels so much is missed some of the subtleties of plant collection. So
Old-fashioned botany. I'm with your dad with that. Yeah.
Sorry, this is quite a mischievous question, but we're sitting here in Brilsey, and Brilsey have thousands and thousands of artifacts and things hidden away somewhere that aren't catalogued. And I just wonder what you two have had a really interesting conversation. And I just wonder if anybody actually knows whether they've got any relevant materials of this kind in their
to-do list. I don't know if they want me to run some workshops or something, but I'm going to find a way of getting in there, exploring myself.
There's probably lots of other things.
Yeah, it's exciting, maybe.
So let's find out that what the next few years, I don't know. But thank you very much. Maybe we could put our hands together one more time.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Yeah.
If you are not tired already of botanical illustration, I actually brought the scan copies printed.
Is that the whole thing or is it a part of it?
This is the whole theatrum. It's just the plants. But this collection, of course, also include animals, and there are ethnographic also portraits. But here is just plant because I'm the plant crazy lady. So, but you can check them yourself if you like. Thank you so much.
So what's your